Hello and welcome to Quackalope. Thank you for being here. Today we're going to give you everything you need to know about Monster Hunter, the board game.
In hopefully 10 minutes?
I mean, in as close to 10 minutes as we are able to do. Now, for context, this is going to be a campaign-based. It also has a one-shot skirmish mode.
Yes, it does.
Monster Hunter tabletop game where you're going to be taking out adventurers, gathering resources, going through a sort of adventure or gather phase where you're collecting a bunch of stuff, fighting a creature during the hunt phase, and then collecting those body parts, bringing them back home, crafting different weapons and items to upgrade your hunter and kind of progress along your skill tree over here at your settlement, and then rinse and repeat and do it again.
I never thought we'd be here in board gaming before, just if you asked me just 1 year ago. Fascinating.
Yeah? Oh, yeah. Because you're mildly obsessed with Monster Hunter.
Mildly is putting it lightly. Yes, I absolutely love the Monster Hunter franchise, so trust me that when I came into this game, I was very, very aware of all the things I needed to hit on.
Yeah, that's fair. And I have always been curious about the Monster Hunter games.
Passing curiosity.
And so I was open to being convinced, as some of the other big box hunter games have maybe not hit the right note.
You mean the one or two before this one?
The 7 or 8 before this
7
one.
or 8? Ooh.
If you're just tuning into our channel here, please hit that subscribe button down below. During the campaign, we will have gameplay of
Anjana,
this big guy, and on top of that, I will be in about a week and a half or so doing a full breakdown and comparison between this and my favorite game of all time.
Kingdom Death?
Kingdom Death Monster, which is sort of the grail that everyone compares all giant miniature-based hunting games to.
Yeah, technically there are some equivalencies that we can find.
All that being said, let's go ahead and dive into what we're doing here. Now, there's going to be 2 parts that I'll go over very quickly that we won't be able to cover as thoroughly, and then I'll let Jan go through the main kind of sequence here. The first part is going to be the gather phase. Could you give me that book right there?
Oh,
the gather phase is going to be a choose-your-own-adventure style campaign.
Yes, it is.
Where you're going to be going through a book of this sorts. And you're going to be, I was making sure that top camera was going on up there. If you notice the slow pause and the glance up where I thought to myself, maybe it wasn't. You're going to be going through this booklet here, and each book is going to have a sequence of events and narrative pathways you can go down. These will result during the campaign in resources you can gather, in weapons and critical upgrades, in time manipulation, that's sort of your resource deck of how long you can be out on a hunt. And most importantly, or more importantly, this will be where you select your prey that determines how you progress throughout the campaign. In your campaign, you're going to have one giant main objective you're trying to complete, taking down a giant big bad, right? Or finally beating that beast that you're after as you explore this new world and set up the very first colony and settlement on this island. But one important thing that I think is worth noting here. Unlike some of the other campaign games, this isn't going to be driven off of a sequence or a narrative choice where it's one after another after another. Instead, you can choose to rehunt, reinvestigate, and visit past hunts. And in fact, if you lose during your campaign, you're not starting back all the way from zero. You don't actually lose time or progression. Instead, you pause, reset, and venture out again as if you had a save file
like Monster Hunter
around year 4 or 5. Now, the other thing that I can't go into much detail on at the moment, just due to the prototype we have, before we get to what we can really talk about, is going to be the gather phase. After you've defeated this beast in the center, you're going to, well, not the gather phase, I feel the resource or upgrade phase. After you've defeated this beast in the center, you're going to roll some dice, allocate those numbers how you would like to choose to pull off the body parts that you're looking for. The back of your board here is going to show the table of buffet items that you can take home. These will all tie and sequence to your own character's progression, and we'll get into this a little bit more in detail in a second, but these armor slots, weapon upgrades, and the way that they manipulate your card or your card deck is really critical to kind of how this game escalates and how much it feels true to the nature of Monster Hunter. And that's about my extent of knowledge.
Speaking of the nature of Monster Hunter,
could you talk about the monster hunting portion of this game?
Yeah, what people are here for. So the question you're asking yourself, have they actually replicated Monster Hunter in what's the most important thing, the mechanics? And I am here to say that I have been actually fairly well surprised as to how they've incorporated everything. The way that this game is going to work is through 2 things. A chaining system, similar to what we've seen in other titles of this nature, and a deck of cards that all apply into that flow. So essentially what you're doing
is
that
your stamina bar.
It is exactly like your stamina bar, just like in the game. So this bar here is going to represent both how you're going to be able to move, how you're going to be able to dodge, and also how you're going to be able to attack. And it is a careful balance, almost like you're on a tightrope, to make sure that you have enough slots available to take crucial actions or make crucial reactions in time before the monster comes and completely tramples you. So for example, you're able to play cards into that chain, and you always have 5 spaces available. And as you keep growing your chain, depending on the timing of the monster, because every attack that the monster does leaves some how do you say those open spaces for people to attack.
You have a flow where you could either attack, take advantage, or potentially dodge and move out of the way. All of that will be related to your stamina bar.
So you have to capitalize on the moments of opportunity, but you don't have that much time. So every time that a monster attacks, it leaves some spaces where you're going to be able to stab or move perfectly where you need to in order to take that break some parts, or just try and stumble it a little bit. And this, for example, here, this card is saying that I can only play 2 cards into my flow. So those 2 cards would activate, and then I would still have spaces for the next time that the monster would activate once more. So for example, here, he would do a belly roll to the right, and that would give me 2 more cards that I can continue adding into my flow. And the interesting thing about these cards is that as the campaign changes and as you start growing your arsenal of weapons, you start changing up the cards here. And each card have different types of requirements or repercussions that occur depending on what you're playing. So, for example, some cards are going to be able to break some of the more fragile parts of the monster. Other cards are going to be able to let you dodge or block in a way that's a little bit more reactionary. And some cards even require you to have previously cards played in that timeline for you to continue growing and making some very cool combos.
It's like a cascading attack, right?
Yes.
It's like you perfectly hit A, B, C, and then slammed it in the throat.
Yes, so this so far feels very reminiscent of Monster Hunter, because if you've played the game before, in Monster Hunter you have a very, not limited, but you have a selected amount of combos that you can activate at any given time. And the way that the game works is that you're just looking for windows of opportunity to activate certain portions of a combo or do certain actions in that given time slot.
Well, and I always remember getting exhausted, turning around, and running away. Is that part of Monster Hunter?
Oh, yes it is. So, it's not all combat and all attacks constantly, except if you're a dual blade user, which I'm assuming would let you clear a boat pretty easily, but as the game moves forward, you're going to have to move. And for you to move, you usually have 1 free movement that you can always implement on your turn. But remember that timeline, remember that it's your stamina bar. If you want to move additional, you're going to have to play cards face down, filling up those crucial spots that you need in order to attack, and the most important thing of all, dodging. So let's talk a little bit more about how the monster behaves, because that is the second most important thing about a game where you're fighting monsters.
And for me, I think it's probably one of the most interesting elements here. Now, we're going to have the monster character board over here, which is going to have a variety of iconography on it that you really don't need to know everything about at the moment. Just know that you're going to have your health, your status effects, your symbols, what it is weak and resistant to, what it's able to do, like special abilities. Here, we have the gluttonous ability, which is going to
something that we didn't actually use?
Well, I mean, it probably would have resulted in us dying quicker. Either way, you're going to have breakpoints as well, which will relate either to in-game effects or campaign-related effects, like ripping off certain body parts and removing certain abilities for armor or damage. However, when you draw, you're going to have this own unique little custom creature deck. And when you draw a card, you're going to be resolving it. I don't know how much you can see of this, but you're going to resolve it based off of identifying who it's targeting. Near or far. Based off of threat levels and based off of distance. Moving. Always moving based on the card and based off the orientation related with the character. Then you're going to resolve the attack. It has a range. It has potentially a wide breadth of potential damage for everyone in front of it. And then, like you were talking about, we have the potential space for us to activate in. Now, the thing that I need to go back to and pause on is the movement that you are sequencing to. When the creature moves, one of the coolest things about what this game is doing on a tactical nature is if this creature here was going to move forward 3, directly at my little arrow girl here, it would move, and I, as the player, would be able to shift that dynamic, adjusting my position on the board, kind of kiting the monster around the space, or just running with my butt crack hanging out like I do in most of the Monster Hunter games. This is probably one of the main elements here that I think it does well in replicating the video game and more importantly, does different from the majority of other tactical Monster Hunter or Monster Skirmish based games.
I really hope that they include a mini that's just like the hunters going like with their waggly arms like that and just like jumping like this. It'd be great. So going back into that, as Jesse stated, the range is going to determine how far the monster is going to attack, all those things. But what we wanted to talk about in regards to the stamina flow here is this value here, which is going to be your dodge percentage. Every single card at the upper right-hand corner is going to have a agility value. And in order for you to dodge an attack, you have to match that agility value. And this is where the weapon systems and this type of styles that you're bringing onto the board start becoming a little bit more important. So for example, with the greatsword, it's a very heavy weapon. You're not going to have that much agility. So for you to dodge something, it's going to take a lot of hard work.
And that's filling up your stamina bar, which means it's going to be harder for you to do things like activate abilities or actually do damage, Jan. And you're going to have to wait from turn to turn as time passes by, as characters and creatures act and react, and as your bar either slowly clears, you get special card abilities that allow you to clear it, or you get knocked out and you spawn back at the very front. Because the odds are, just like in the video game, this isn't a one life, one shot type of thing. You got 3 of them, and you're going to use at least 2.
Well, if you're not a proficient hunter, which you will be gaining experience in this game and becoming a little bit better. And speaking of time, the game also does a little bit to kind of change things up. There's going to be a deck of cards that determines what type of cleanup phase you go through every time you finish your turn, and there is the possibility for different things to trigger and give you benefits.
Mild things like movement a little bit, sequencing off of your timeline slightly, even some negative potential consequences in there as well, depending on where you went on your story mission. So we've done a overview.
Yes.
Now I want to get to like final impressions, final thoughts, the things that people are actually here to, not the nuance, the generalities.
Oh.
Jan,
Nobody cares about generalities, Jesse.
Surface level. First impressions, final thoughts. Does this do something worthwhile? Where is it executing Monster Hunter well? Where is it executing Monster Hunter poorly?
So, as I said, I have been pleasantly surprised so far by our experience.
I'm not talking about myself. I'm talking mainly about the game.
I don't have positive experiences about that. I'm sorry.
Wow, you don't like the game?
No, I think we're missing the point. Either way, so I have been pleasantly surprised with this game so far. The things that it's doing well, I feel that the combat and the way that the cards are playing off of the conceits of each one of the weapon styles has been very faithful so far.
Bow felt very different from Broadsword. When I played the dual blades last time, there's a lot of things that, while the iconography seems fairly straightforward, and albeit not the prettiest, they do honestly feel reminiscent of what I'd expect those weapons and that attack style to be.
And the most interesting thing about this card deck is that it feels exciting to play it, right? There's a certain tenseness with having the stamina thing that is always locked into 5, and maybe in the campaign as you start growing your armor there could be addition, because one of the main things about the game is that you're able to grow your stamina past certain points and be able to do more things. So I wouldn't be surprised if I can see this extending, but this felt like a really interesting decision point. Every turn I was always debating, should I push my turn a little so I can have some more space so that when a big attack comes I have the space in order to activate and do that combo, especially because I'm a charge blade. And as a greatsword, and because I'm a greatsword user, I can charge myself up and deal ridiculous amounts of damage. So I have to take into consideration the realities of the combat style that I am implementing, which is something that was going to be very difficult to implement, and so far they've done really well. The other element that I think they're doing fairly well so far is with the actual monsters. Like you would think in this card, there's not that much AI, there's not much nuance or subtleties as to how things are behaving. However, the Great Jagras already isn't always moving forward. It has moved to the left in situations where it might have been.
Back, rolling backwards, belly slamming down, or spitting in front of it, which are all traits that you actually see in the personality.
The Jagras does all those things, and it also does those things and misses me all the time, depending on where I'm located. And the same thing happens here. Also, I really liked what you were saying. That ability to kite, that ability that the monster is following you, and you're kind of like running away with your arms flailing, just like in the game. that
For
is
some
represented
reason to
here
me,
as well.
Every time it happens, it feels cool to me. It feels cool to be able to react in a mechanical way.
And that is also another strategic layer
It is.
because you're able to position yourself. And another thing that we may not have mentioned is that this deck of cards also has symbols in the back, which means that you're able to anticipate a little bit
of insight.
Based on his behaviors and based on patterns, what it might be doing. Now, the areas that I am still a little bit hesitant with I need to see.
I got this.
Oh.
For mine, at least.
Okay, go ahead.
I don't think this stands predominantly as a one-shot.
Okay.
I think, and you know me, I'm a campaign player, which means I am excited about the campaign, but there is a bit of nuance there. I think this mainly has itself set up as a game that you want to sit down and play 20 hours worth of.
Yep.
You want to go through the full narrative adventure, you want to watch your characters grow. The one-shots at this moment are mixed with resources that you get that you'll never be able to utilize, a big question of why would I rip a creature apart, and 2 giant sections of the game that you don't really dive into. Now, Kingdom Death has the exact same thing. I'd never run Kingdom Death as a one-shot, and even when they tried to with one of the most recent expansions,
the Giga line, right?
I think it works, but it works in a very I already love Kingdom Death way.
It doesn't have the consequences. It doesn't have the larger narrative that you need in order to feel responsibility.
And I play it to integrate it into the campaign, not necessarily or not predominantly to play it as a one-off experience. I think this, on a very lighter side, has the same issue. It's designed around a larger story, and that larger story may be really good, but if you're looking for a one-off experience, the question exists, how often do you get those future bosses or more adept characters to the table?
Here's the thing with Monster Hunter. Monster Hunter is not known for its story.
It's
Monster
not
Hunter
a
is known
story.
for its combat and how
It's
you...
a campaign.
Sure.
I'm not saying there's some deep
It's more about the
narrative
collecting
puzzle.
the resources, banking on better equipment.
I'm saying gear, resources, upgrading abilities, and I don't know. Maybe there'll be a quick start guide to mid-campaign bosses with characters that feel crunchy and unique, but until we get there, right now, Prologue up is where I'm starting.
You know what I'm pretty sure what they'll do. I think the initial onset of that quest book as a one-shot right now is just a placeholder for what will later be introduced in the campaign as the arena mode. So in Monster Hunter, there are 2 ways that you can play the game. You can play the game however you want, but what I'm trying to say is that there's a particular mission branch.
What?
There's a particular mission branch that's called Arena.
Okay.
And what you do when you go into Arena is that they give you these resources, these weapons, and you got to go fight in a closed out space. And that closed out space also has different types of environmental elements that you can implement to try and hit the monster and deal massive damage to it. Trying to recreate actual environments.
That, if it exists, could 100% fix that complaint. I either have not seen an email, I could be completely ignorant of information that's already out there, I'll own up
Or
to
it
that.
could just be something that's not been announced.
It could be something that's coming down the road or not announced, or maybe not even in this game. But right now, for the prototype that we have, I think the campaign's really compelling. I think the escalation, I think the gear, I don't think it's a heavy story, and I don't think you have to put 80 hours into playing it. I think you got to put 10 to 15, and you'll have a really rewarding experience.
And tying into that same thing, and I think that kind of goes into what I was saying, that the one-shots don't feel like they have enough meat on their bones to kind of hook you into just this being a skirmish game that you bring out to the table every time. And I think in a large part that is due to the lack of dynamism that is on the board. This particular Monster Hunter game is based on Monster Hunter World, which established some very new systems and mechanisms into the core franchise. And that mainly comes from interactivity and dynamism that is incorporated into the world. There are other creatures that are roaming around that the monster can attack and take damage from. There are animals that you can implement to kind of like distract the monster. There are waterfalls. Yes, there are waterfalls, cascades, floating rocks in the sky that you can make fall and take advantage of. And above all, there are multiple ecosystems and biomes that you can traverse in a single match that keep everything always very refreshing. And that is not something that I have seen yet in this one shot.
Sure.
That I'm not even sure if you can really implement. The one thing that I would have loved to see is that when you start a campaign or a one-shot, that I have a lot more of these tokens and terrain features.
Or at least more agency over what they are and what they do.
Correct.
I agree with you completely. Right now, all we have is predominantly the bushes and the water. The bush gives you a little bit more defense.
And the water rusts
The water
rusts your space.
It dulls your weapon a little bit quicker. that's not as interesting as it could be. And not as interesting as I hope and expect the game is when it is finished.
The other element that I think is a little bit confusing right now is there's a lot of iconography on this one. It is a little bit of an overload initially. Once you start figuring it out, it'll become a lot easier, but I think it'll be a big lift initially.
I did notice right here on the front of the rulebook, I do want to acknowledge this. They say, if this is your first time playing Monster Hunter World, the board game, The Ancient Forest, we recommend you watch the Learn to Play video with a link or download the Quick Start Guide with the link. We don't, right now on the prototype, as far as I'm aware, again, I could be missing an email.
Have access to the link.
Have both of those, but for the record, for you the players, I think they are aware of that, and I think they're doing a lot of work to make sure it is accessible as possible. Because they expect non-gamers, non-board gamers, to be tabling this.
And the other thing that I wanted to mention about, and you know what, going over the more important things in regards to also like Steamforge and the games that they put out in the past, etc. I think this is actually one of their strongest showings in terms of a mechanical.
I'd 100% agree.
Perspective.
I'd 100% agree.
I have, again, reinforcing this. I think that the gameplay of this is quite faithful to the game and is very fun. I had a lot of enjoyment playing my cards, knowing what to play. Like all of that decision points were crunchy and felt like they had meaning and consequence. I've heard a lot of people say that Monster Hunter World basically became like the best parts of the Dark Souls franchise that they had tried in the past. I don't know how true that is.
I hear you.
I don't know how true that is. All I know is that the game that I'm currently engaged with, I have liked a lot more than I thought I would have. So if everything that we've described to you sounds like what you needed or wanted or didn't even know you had a thirst for, I think this is one that you should actually look at very closely. And make some determinations, because I don't think you'll be disappointed in what's there.
And like I said, this has gone on way longer than it was supposed to, but we will be releasing a gameplay mid-campaign, and I'll be doing a full breakdown comparing this to Kingdom Death Monster, so those of you out there that want a heavy comparison with sort of the godfather of this space, I have some interesting things to say, and some interesting things to point out when it comes to what both games are trying to execute on. Monster Hunter isn't 100% there, but it also doesn't drop the ball in every location. So, with that being said, whatever the case, whatever you do, remember to do the important thing: kill giant daddy beasts and turn them into your clothing.
Definitely our catchphrase. See you next time, everybody.